Long before the name Zimbabwe echoed across the continent, this city had already risen from stone and spirit. Imagine, here in the heart of southern Africa, high on a plateau, the builders of Great Zimbabwe were at work. They laid each granite block by hand, a colossal jigsaw puzzle without a single drop of mortar. Yet, these walls stood tall, defying centuries of wind and rain. These weren't just walls, they were messages carved in silence. Each stone was a word in a story of power, of identity, of a grand vision. At the very center of this sprawling metropolis stood the Great Enclosure. Think of a massive circular wall, stretching 250 meters in circumference, with some sections soaring over 10 meters high that's taller than a 3-story building. Inside this impressive structure, another puzzle awaits, a solid, conical tower. It's completely mysterious. No doors, no windows, no known purpose. For years, archaeologists have simply called it a mystery, a silent monument whose secrets are lost to time. But for the people who lived here, it was more than a mystery. It was their legacy, a symbol of their ingenuity and their place in the world. And what a place it was. Great Zimbabwe was a bustling hub of commerce. Trade flourished. Merchants traveled all the way from the Swahili coast, bringing goods from distant lands. Gold, the lifeblood of the kingdom, flowed out. In return, the city filled with treasures from across the globe, delicate glass beads, fine Chinese porcelain, and elegant Persian pottery. This wasn't some isolated, forgotten kingdom. It was a global player, deeply connected to the world's trade networks, a center of wealth and culture. Yet, the most powerful presence here wasn't the gold, but the leader who controlled it all, the Mutapa. The name translates to the Lord of the Plundered Lands or Master Pillager, a title that commanded respect and fear. This ruler's words shaped the destiny of the Shona people, guiding their fortunes and expanding their influence. The Mutapa wasn't just a king, he was the spiritual and political heart of the empire. His authority was absolute, his connection to the ancestral spirits believed to be the source of the kingdom's prosperity. As the kingdom expanded under the rule of the Mutapa dynasty, so did the myth of its origin. The story of Great Zimbabwe became larger than life, a tale passed down through generations. This was a city built not just with skilled hands, but with powerful dreams. The very name, Zimbabwe, comes from the Shona phrase Jimba Ja Mabwe, meaning houses of stone. It's a testament to the enduring power of this place, a name that honors the ancestors who raised these walls from the earth. So, when we look at these silent, weathered stones today, we're not just looking at ancient ruins. We're seeing the ambition of a people who carved their story into the very landscape. We're witnessing a civilization that understood power, art, and its connection to the wider world. Great Zimbabwe is more than a historical site. It's a powerful reminder that Africa has always been a continent of great empires, grand visions, and legacies written in stone. Have you ever looked at ancient ruins and wondered not just how they were built, but who lived there? What were their lives like? What did they dream of? Today, we're journeying back in time, not to Rome or Greece, but to sub-Saharan Africa, to a city of stone and secrets, Great Zimbabwe. Forget what you think you know about silent, empty ruins. Great Zimbabwe was a vibrant, bustling kingdom, a metropolis alive with trade, politics, and immense power. And at the very heart of this kingdom stood the Mambos, the kings of the Shona people. These weren't just rulers. They were seen as divine guardians of wealth, culture, and the land itself. Their authority was absolute, believed to be bestowed upon them by ancestral spirits. When a Mambo spoke, his words were law. His presence was considered sacred. Imagine a king so revered that he lived in near total seclusion. The Mambo resided within the awe-inspiring hill complex, a fortress of granite walls and imposing watchtowers, physically and symbolically elevated above his people. No one could simply walk up and speak to him. To approach the king was a deeply formal ritual, a privilege granted to very few. When he did communicate, it wasn't through casual conversation. His decrees were carried by messengers, his voice amplified across the kingdom. When he traveled, the air would thunder with the sound of drums, announcing the movement of a divine figure. This was a king who ruled not just with an army, but with an aura of mystery and sacred power. The Mambo's dominion was vast, a sprawling territory that stretched from the mighty Zambezi River in the north all the way down to the Limpopo River in the south. This wasn't just land. It was a network of communities, villages, and resources all under his control. Local chiefs and villages paid tribute to the capital, not with money, but with the real wealth of the land, cattle, grain, and the most precious commodity of all, gold. In return for this tribute, the king offered something invaluable: protection and justice. He was the ultimate arbiter of disputes, the guarantor of stability in a world that could be unpredictable. His rule provided the security that allowed the kingdom to flourish. And flourish it did, thanks in large part to its incredible mineral wealth. Gold mining was the heartbeat of Great Zimbabwe's economy. Deep within the earth, miners extracted the precious metal that would make the kingdom legendary. Skilled artisans in the city then transformed this raw gold into intricate jewelry, beautiful ornaments, and symbols of status. These weren't just shiny objects. They were expressions of a sophisticated culture and a thriving economy. Word of this wealth traveled far and wide. Traders, brave and enterprising, crossed vast deserts and navigated treacherous landscapes to reach Great Zimbabwe. They brought goods from distant lands and left with ivory, precious metals, and other local treasures. This was a major hub on the international trade routes of the medieval world, connecting southern Africa to the Swahili coast and from there to Arabia, India, and even China. At its zenith, around the 14th century, Great Zimbabwe was home to an estimated 18,000 people. To put that in perspective, that was larger than London at the same time. It was a sprawling urban center, a testament to incredible organization, engineering, and social cohesion. The Great Enclosure, with its massive, mortarless walls, still stands today as a silent witness to the city's former glory. It wasn't a fortress for defense, but a symbol of the king's prestige and power, a royal residence of unparalleled scale in the region. But as with all great powers, immense success often plants the seeds of its own decline. The very concentration of wealth and power created challenges. Internal rivalries began to simmer. Ambitious nobles and competing factions vied for influence, their ambitions rising like smoke behind the throne. The massive population also put a tremendous strain on the local environment. Resources like firewood and grazing land, once abundant, became scarce. The delicate balance that had allowed the city to thrive for centuries began to falter. The kingdom didn't collapse in a single dramatic event. Instead, it was a gradual decline, a slow fading of its power as the center of political and economic gravity shifted elsewhere. By the late 15th century, the great city was largely abandoned, its people migrating to new centers of power. But even in its silence, Great Zimbabwe tells a powerful story. It speaks of a golden era when a magnificent African kingdom, carved from stone and ruled by kings who blended divine authority with political shrewdness, stood unmatched. It remains a majestic, mysterious, and profound symbol of a sophisticated precolonial civilization. A kingdom built on gold and granite, ruled by silence and strength. No kingdom, no matter how mighty, lasts forever. Not even one built from stone. For Great Zimbabwe, the cracks began to show in the late 1400s. It wasn't one single event, but a slow, creeping change that would eventually silence the bustling city. Imagine the great trade routes, once the lifeblood of the kingdom, like arteries carrying gold, ivory, and beads. Slowly, these arteries began to clog and reroute. New powerful kingdoms were rising in the north, like Mutapa and Rosvi. They became the new centers of gravity, pulling trade and influence away from the south. The merchants and caravans that once flocked to Great Zimbabwe now had new destinations. The city's markets, once vibrant and loud, grew quieter. The pulse of commerce that had sustained a massive population for centuries was weakening. But it wasn't just about trade. A city of nearly 20,000 people puts an enormous strain on its environment, especially with the technology of the time. The vast herds of cattle that signified wealth and fed the population had grazed the surrounding grasslands for generations. Over time, the lush pastures were worn down, leaving the soil exposed and less fertile. The people also needed wood, tons of it, for cooking, heating, and construction. The forests surrounding the city were slowly cleared, tree by tree. This deforestation had a cascading effect. Without trees to hold the soil in place, erosion washed away the precious topsoil. Water sources, once reliable, began to dwindle as the land grew drier. The very foundation of their survival, the land itself, was becoming exhausted. Faced with these mounting pressures, the people of Great Zimbabwe had to make a choice. They couldn't stay in a city that could no longer feed them or offer them opportunities. So, they began to leave. It wasn't a sudden exodus, but a gradual migration, a slow emptying of the great stone enclosures. Many followed ambitious new leaders northward, drawn by the promise of fresh land and new fortunes. These were the people who would go on to build the powerful Mutapa Empire. They carried with them the incredible skills of their ancestors, the masterful stonework, the complex systems of governance, and the spiritual traditions that had defined life in Great Zimbabwe. The legacy wasn't lost. It was transplanted. Others didn't travel so far. They scattered across the region, forming smaller, more sustainable communities. They settled in new villages, still carrying the memory of their former home. The stories of the great city, of its towering walls and powerful kings, were passed down from generation to generation, becoming a core part of their identity. The city itself was left to the elements. By the time Portuguese explorers sailing along the coast first heard whispers of a legendary stone city deep in the African interior, Great Zimbabwe was already a ghost town. Its magnificent walls still stood, a testament to its former glory, but its people were gone. The spirit of the city had moved on. When European colonists and explorers finally stumbled upon the ruins centuries later, they were stunned. They couldn't believe what they were seeing. In their prejudiced worldview, they refused to accept that such a sophisticated and massive structure could have been built by Africans. They spun wild theories, attributing its construction to everyone from ancient Phoenicians to the Queen of Sheba, anyone but the local Shona people. They tried to erase the true history, to deny the indigenous genius that was so clearly on display. But they failed. The truth was never lost. It was preserved in the oral traditions of the Shona people, passed down through songs, poems, and stories. They always knew who built Great Zimbabwe. They knew it was African. It was ours, built by our hands, guided by our kings. And though empires rise and fall and people move on, the stones themselves hold that memory. They still stand, whispering the story of a great African civilization to anyone who is willing to listen. But when European colonizers arrived in the late 19th century, they couldn't accept this reality. They looked at the sophisticated architecture, the sheer scale of the city, and a narrative of denial began to form. They claimed it must have been built by outsiders, Arabs, Phoenicians, even ancient Hebrews from the time of King Solomon, anyone but the local African people. They spun tales of lost white tribes and mythical queens, deliberately trying to erase the truth. It was a story designed to justify their own presence, to suggest that a civilization of such magnitude couldn't possibly be of African origin. This colonial narrative was pushed for decades, taught in schools, and spread across the world, obscuring the real history of this incredible site. It was an act of cultural theft, an attempt to disconnect a people from their heritage. But the stones, they told a different story, a proudly African one. While the colonial narrative held sway, archaeologists and historians began to dig deeper, quite literally. They examined the pottery, the artifacts, the construction techniques, and the oral traditions of the local people. And the evidence became undeniable. The truth was finally uncovered and confirmed. The Shona people, ancestors of the majority of modern Zimbabweans, built Great Zimbabwe. There were no foreign hands, no imported plans, only the brilliance of a people deeply rooted in their land, using local materials and their own ingenuity. The unique architectural style, the cultural artifacts found on site, everything pointed back to an indigenous African civilization at its peak. This discovery wasn't just an academic correction. It was a restoration of history, a powerful affirmation of African achievement. And so, in 1980, when the nation of Rhodesia finally gained its independence after a long and hard-fought struggle, it needed a new name. A name that would shed the weight of its colonial past and embrace its true identity. It didn't choose a name from a colonial figure or a borrowed concept. It looked to its own history, to the most powerful symbol of its heritage. It chose its name from these sacred ruins. The new nation became Zimbabwe, derived from the Shona phrase Jimba Ja Mabwe, meaning house of stone, a nation built on memory, strength, and identity, drawing its very name from the silent, powerful walls of its ancestors. It was a declaration to the world that this new country was founded on a proud African legacy, one that had been denied but never destroyed. Today, Great Zimbabwe stands as a UNESCO World Heritage Site, recognized globally for its outstanding universal value. Visitors from all over the world walk its ancient paths, marvel at its dry stone walls, and feel the presence of the past. But it's more than just a tourist destination. It's a living source of inspiration. Artists draw inspiration from its patterns for their work. Musicians sing of its glory. And the youth, like you and me, have a responsibility and an opportunity to tell its story through our voices, through our creativity, through digital platforms like this. We ensure that the whispers of the past become the anthems of the future. Because history is not just about what happened back then. It's about who we are now, what we stand for, and who we choose to become. This is Lyric Chronicles, where African stories rise again, like kingdoms carved in stone. Thanks for watching, and if you believe in the power of history, make sure to subscribe and join our community.